right, welcome. This is a little session on the topic of the planning onion. I'm here with Petri, who is my co-trainer at Berteig from the Scrum Alliance. He's an extremely experienced trainer, coach, and consultant in Agile methods and Scrum in particular. Petri and I are going to have a little discussion about this concept of the planning onion. Petri, do you want to say anything to introduce yourself a bit more?
Thank you, Mishkin. It's a pleasure to have a chat about this because I'm doing this stuff on the training, and so this gives people a great perception of what kind of things we talk about there. So I have 17 years of experience of Agile, doing it myself, and then of course I've done a lot of training I've been a CST for 13 years, and so I've seen a lot of places all these years, and it's fun. It's still fun. I still enjoy this stuff.
Yeah, and just on a sort of more personal note, Petri is based in the northern climes of Finland. I mean southern Finland, but it's north for most people. So,
but it is warmed by the Gulf Stream, so it's not quite as extreme that you would imagine.
There you go. There you go. Good. All right, let's get into it. So tell us about the planning onion, Petri. Go ahead.
Okay, so the idea of a planning onion, and bad jokes aside, is not because it makes you cry, because it's got layers, and that represents the way that Agilists plan. We have not one plan, but we have plenty of plans. Well, not plenty, but many of different timelines with different levels of precision. So if we look at Scrum, and I'm going to use Scrum as a foundation for this. So the terminology is going to be Scrum-based. You could use these ideas in any framework. If you've used Kanban, put a week instead of a sprint, and so on. Anyway, so if we look at the basic heartbeat of an Agile project, or let's say Scrum project at this point, is the sprint. That is the increment, the planning, the short hop from, pulling a chunk in and then delivering. So the sprint is the heart of this onion. And let's put that up. So that's usually 1 to 3 weeks. Of course, I know that it could be 4 weeks according to Scrum, but I really haven't seen anybody do 4 weeks.
Or it could be a month. I don't know what that's about, but anyway.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so sprint is the basic cadence. And that's usually the shortest time frame that a stakeholder would see and should see, because the stuff that goes inside the sprint, and there are cycles of planning inside the sprint, those are predominantly the team's cadences, so teams planning cycles and feedback cycles. So I wouldn't want to expose them to stakeholders, sort of like a privacy thing, so that the team can focus on their work and not worry daily about talking to unnecessary people. Now, inside, I'm going to draw some of the circles inside. So first of all, we have the day. That's obviously we have the daily scrums and so on. That's a planning cycle for the team. Inside that, we may have cycles like acceptance test, under which we may have a unit test, and inside which we may have things like pairing. So there's a lot of cycles inside the sprint that the team uses in their work. But for the most part, we don't of Scrum, we don't consider that planning. It's just self-organization and ways of working inside the sprint. So when we start looking,
so just a quick question, Petri, for the daily level, and you mentioned the daily Scrum. I know a lot of people kind of consider that like status reporting, even though it's not supposed to be. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, you just said what it isn't. It isn't supposed to be a status report. In other words, and that's where the distinction between a good team and what I call a work group is that within a team, people are actually self-organizing and taking ownership and initiative within the sprint. So in that kind of an environment where we collaborate on a shared goal, the daily Scrum is a really important syncing moment, and it's a planning meeting, really. We look at what happened yesterday. What were the things that we should all know, in case we don't know, because we might have communication ongoing all the time. But in case we summarize, where was I? What happened yesterday? Then we talk about, so in order for us to hit our goals, what the commitment that we made in the sprint planning, what do we need to do today? And then what's blocking us from achieving or making it difficult for us to achieve that commitment that we made? So it is a collaborative planning. It's not from one person to a manager or a team lead. It's between everybody within the team. And
yeah, and I'll just add that the day-long cycle is a specific cadence that Scrum requires. The inner layers that you have there, acceptance tests, unit tests, and pairing, they don't necessarily have a fixed cadence in the same way that the other layers do.
And it's also highly dependent on your technical practices. Like if you don't use what I consider proper agile development techniques, then of course you don't have similar kind of acceptance test driven development cycle there where you build an acceptance test and start building code against it. And when it runs, you build the next acceptance test and run that cycle. Of course, then you have something else.
Yeah,
it could be a task, or it could be something else. So I just drew the ones that I would like to see because of XP like development practices, DevOps like practices that the team has. But anyway, so that's inside the sprint. That's the team's domain. And certainly, by the way, just saying, if your team is non-software team, then that might be justifiably quite different apart from the daily cycle, because technologies are different in non-software than software. Anyway, so that's inside the sprint. So when we go outside the sprint, the first layer outside is what I call refinement. I'll try to make that nice. Because drawing circles is very difficult, I find. Anyway, refinement. So refinement is, we might consider rolling way planning, but it's a clarification of the items that we're going to do in the near future. And so I like to think that, and my experience shows that usually it takes about 2 to 3 sprints, and this is assuming about 2-week sprints, to clarify an item so that it's clear enough and understood well enough by the development team so they can actually effectively do it. Now, that's accepting exceptions, right? So sometimes we get something that we have to rush into the sprints and get it done, and we might not have the time to refine it properly the way that we would like to. But if, assuming those, well, other than that stuff, we would like to prepare. And I found that it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to work with the stakeholders and others to get the items good enough that the team can effectively do them. So that's refinement. That's a period we track that clarification work about 2-3 sprints.
And for what it's worth, a lot of people in agile environments talk about this in terms of getting backlog items to a ready state. That terminology might be familiar to some people.
I'm gonna write down that word later as I go through. How would I visualize these different layers? So the word ready is actually coming out. So yes, definitely. Anyway, so refinement is a rolling way planning. It's always, we keep sort of the wake ahead of us and work on that. The next layer outside of that is what I consider, I call release. So to me, release is the next major chunk we want to show to the world. It's the next chunk we make a big fuss about. It's not a deployment. Deployment is putting something into production, and we might do that every sprint. We might do it multiple times a sprint, or whenever we want to fix something like a bug. But release is a new capability, new feature, something that's possibly connected to marketing events, sales activity, trainings, education, all kinds of things associated with actually using the release. Now, in agile environments, most of the sort of these kind of major releases tend to be between 2 to 6 months. And so anything longer than 6 months seems like a very long time. If it's less than 2 months, it often feels that there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just small. It's not a sort of a thing that makes a big splash most of the times. It might, some individual features, but usually I can see people do it. So 2 to 3 months forward, that's certainly the level where we involve the stakeholders quite a lot, because they need to know. Those are the moments where, they get the release. It's going to make a big difference to them. It may enable them to do some new business initiatives. They might be able to sell new things or enable them to expand their business to some areas or some legal compliance. So the releases do make a big splash. And so when we talk about the future, then release is usually quite an important concept for the stakeholders. And they want to be involved in those decisions a lot.
So there may be some cases where a team or an organization doesn't really think about releases because everything is very incremental. But by and large, especially if we're looking at larger organizations, this is typically a really important part of planning.
Yeah, and for a good reason. If we have more sort of predictability in an environment, whatever we think of that, but we have a lot of existing things, there are dependencies, and release level is where we deal with many of the larger scale dependencies, not technical, small scale, but like when do we use or start doing some new product areas or expand to new areas, like
business process dependencies, or financial dependencies, or you mentioned earlier regulatory things, for example.
So release level is that. Now outside of the release, the next layer is roadmap. So if we think of release as a collection of sprints delivering onto something bigger, then roadmap is a collection of releases telling us where do we intend, where do we at this point of time envision that we might want to go, and then communicate that to stakeholders and let them prepare mentally. And we can talk with them like, this release is coming out 4 months from now. It's going to have these and these things. So what would be the next important things for you? And so providing the visibility. Now, I find that usually roadmaps seem to range from about 6 to 24 months into the future. Could be longer, but usually it starts getting so vague. The biggest I've heard is 8 years. But
actually, I've got you beat there. I worked
do?
with an organization that had a 50-year roadmap.
Okay, that's not software though, is it?
It is actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking about 50
interesting situation. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, that beats me by a factor of 6. Well done. And I didn't even do it. It was a friend of mine doing it. So, the biggest I've done is probably 2-3 years. Anyway, so roadmap, that's sort of what kind of future releases are we planning to do, and numbering, and what the main content epics that we intend to deliver in each of those. Now, the last layer, the outermost shell of this planning onion, is then, of course, the vision, the product vision that we have for this. Now, if we start combining this to Scrum, for example, we can connect some of the concepts in the latest Scrum guide into this layering. So first of all, we have the concept of a product vision. And we can clearly see that this is connected to the outermost layer. So we need to have sort of a vision, why we exist, what is our purpose, what is meaning. And that's what we would call product vision. And who's responsible for that? The product owner. Of course, this is always done in collaboration with the stakeholders and as part of the larger ecosystem as you are within an organization, and also with your stakeholders outside the company. The next thing that's in the latest Scrum guide is the product vision. Oh, sorry, what was it called?
Release goal.
Product goal. The name was, the next layer is what the Scrum guide added as, a planning artifact, is the product goal. So product goal is the next milestone that we're aiming for. What is the next concrete goal that we want to deliver? And that's obviously connected to the release. That's the release. So that gives us a target, if we put it that way. And the last one is the sprint goal. And that's obviously connected with the sprint. So here we can see or we can use this as sort of like a sum function. Product goal is a sum of sprint goals. So when we think of a product goal and we think about planning at a sprint level, the sprint goal should basically tell us a story, how we intend to deliver the product goal. What is the flow of development and the purpose of each of these increments in achieving the product goal? Similarly, we could say product goal, sum of product goals is the product vision, although that is more changing, it's not as concrete usually, whereas the product goal is usually quite concrete. We have a pretty good idea what we want to ship in this next release, even if it's not like specific details or features, but in terms of like business solutions or outcomes that we want to deliver. So that's how we are connected.
Now, one thing that I know a lot of our clients struggle with is how to map this into project management frameworks. Is there an obvious connection here in terms of, you know, traditional project management and maybe even portfolio management?
So obviously, as an agilist, I'm a huge proponent of product-based thinking, but in I still have a lot of experience running projects. That's where we started using Scrum in the first place, project for customers. And so we had all the trappings of a project plan. We had a requirements document. We have pre-approved budgets and timelines. And so the product goal is pretty often the sort of the connection to that. So we might say, we might have a project goal, which could serve a similar function as the product goal does. It tells us what's the main objective, what is the purpose of this project, what is the outcome that we need, the change that we need to deliver. And then we'd say the sprint goals, you know, build up.
Yeah, so the project goal is very similar to the product goal is similar to like a project charter, because especially in an agile environment, a product goal is a lightweight thing. It's not like a huge document with all the details, and so I think the comparable might be the project charter then.
Yeah, I think it would be. I think, you know, this comes down to sort of principles. I believe that when we embark on a journey, we should know where we're going. Even if we down the road, even if we change it, but we should have a target that we try to do, the purpose for this work, and the value definition. Why are we investing this much money into this? What is the purpose? And that has to be clear. If it's not clear, we shouldn't do Scrum. We shouldn't do projects. So when you say project charter, we could have a product charter or something like that. And I think the product goal serves that specific function too. Now I'm going to take the word project away from here.
Yes, we should definitely think about product-oriented thinking. But one other comment is that this is also related to the kinds of questions that we're asking and answering. You know, like a product vision is about why. Why are we doing something? A product goal is at a very high level the what. What are we doing?
Yeah. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. And then the sprint goal incorporates still a little bit of what, but also a little bit of how from a business perspective, not from a technical perspective, but you know, like how from a business perspective. And then within the sprint, we get the how from the technical perspective as well, and the who, right? So self-organizing.
Yeah, the who question is there.
The who
somewhere
is
on
the daily level,
maybe on all of these layers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if the vision doesn't talk about who are we doing this for, I would ask those questions. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great product. Who's going to use it?
Yeah.
Who you think is going to use it? All right. So the last thing I usually talk about is trying to give people some kind of a more concrete idea of what each of these layers could look like. Because it's easy to say, well, there are layers, but it makes it more tangible when we can show a diagram or a visualization for each of these layers. Yeah. Now, when it comes to vision, then that might be a presentation. It might be a product box exercise. It could be something, but usually something high level. And I'm just gonna go, on a leg here and say a PowerPoint presentation. Now, that's not how you communicate it, but that may be the result. It could be a workshop. I'm going to write down the product box, because that's a great exercise for this purpose as well.
And a traditional product vision statement would also fit in that category.
Let's write that down. Elevator pitch. And there's a lot of different variations, as long as it's high level and not too detailed, that we don't think that we know how we're going to get that completely every detail considered. Maybe timelines and stuff. But anyway, the roadmap, and I might surprise someone here, but I'm going to say a Gantt chart may actually be very good for this. Because when we talk about roadmap, what we do need to communicate is like, what are the major pieces that we think we need to move, that are moving, and how are they connected to each other, and the general timelines, and possibly other programs or projects. So sometimes a Gantt chart does a very good job, as long as it's not the kind of Gantt chart that we used to building in project management, which is small tasks and interconnected waterfalls, but just that we want to visualize, like, what are the major parts, major initiatives, how they possibly connected.
Yeah, and you probably have some milestones in there and stuff like that. I know, actually, yeah, I've built Gantt chart similar looking things for roadmaps for clients, because yeah, they want to have some sense of what's time going to look like, what's in parallel, what are some dependencies, and it's reasonable. Yeah.
And that's exactly. So Gantt chart, go for it if you think it. I mean, that at that level, you can of course talk about other things as well. Maybe some other visualizations could work, but Gantt chart, go for it. Now, release, the most common way I draw this or visualize this is simply a timeline. So I draw, I mean, if I do it, talking with a product owner or business owner, I simply ask, I draw a line on a whiteboard, or I draw it on a flip chart paper, and I ask, what is the relevant timeline for you? And they might say, well, we are thinking about 6 months ahead with this release. So, if it's now, well, let's say it's the beginning of February now, they might say, we want to get a release out before summer. So before the summer holidays. And so then I would say, okay, so we have a February here, and we are right here right now. Let's put a dot there. And you said that would be March, April, May, that would be beginning of June. So you said somewhere in June you want to release it. So yeah, okay, let's put it half in the middle of the month. All right, so that means we got a 4.5 months time. So what are the what are the goals you want to achieve? And so I would ask what, they would tell me, like, these are the major epics or major feature areas we want to launch in that schedule, because, and then there's some kind of connection and rationale for the business and time. Then I said, okay, fair enough. What are the intermediary milestones? Like, are you going to run a beta? Are you going to run alpha or some other intermediary demos or releases? And so then I ask also, okay, so what do you want? So they might say, well, like early May, we probably want to do a beta. So let's put a beta there. Let's say that's the 1.0. And okay, good. What do you want to release there? So they might give me, okay, so these are the critical things we want to test in there that we need to get ready. And then they might say, we also want to do an alpha, sort of an early demo, and we want to ship that, that February. So somewhere in March, April, before Easter holidays anyways. So we might say that's an alpha. So what do you want to prove there? And again, they might say, these are the critical things that we need to show in that. And bingo, we have a roadmap or release plan, really. Sorry, not roadmap, that was a high level, but we have a release plan. And now we already can see pretty well how much time we have for various things. When should things be ready? How are they connected in time? And also, intermediate planning horizons. So now we know.
Yeah,
if we
and
take,
from that, the other thing is those little lists for each of those kind of pieces, that can then become part of, for example, the initial version of a product backlog.
well, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If we don't have it already, those
Yes.
definitely are items in there. Now, if we have 2-week sprints, we can clearly, easily see that, we got 2 sprints per month. So we have 4 sprints to get to alpha. So one of the things I find a problem in project is that we don't look at the whole enough. We don't look at what can we afford to spend time on and how much time we can afford to spend on it. And then people spend too much time on, well, I can't argue important things, but they make them too well, or they don't optimize them the right way. So as a consequence, when we start getting near the release date or some milestone that we need to do, we find out that we're running out of time. And I've seen that happen.
So at this level, you would also then probably have some discussions about cost and financial benefits and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And also, what do we want to test? What do we want to learn about in each of the milestones? But also, because I want to get that connection to, to the first sprint already, or if not the first, the second at least. That we already have a target. We have this and this much time for this target. Are we going to get there? And if so, what do we have? In one project, just to provide an example, in one project, the release date was set to 15th of April. And there was many reasons why it had to go out that day. And I wasn't going to argue. We were 6 weeks before that. So this was a planning meeting 6 weeks before that release date. And the product owner basically said, we have 6 major features or significant features that we need to have in that release before we can really push it live. And so you can do the basic math. 6 weeks to go, 6 big features or main features to put in the system. How much time do we have for each of the features? So if any one of those 6 takes longer than a week, then we know that that's not a sustainable pattern. So the first one that we tackled was search. And we basically took, so what is the version of search? Not the perfect version at the, what it might be a year from now or 2 years from now, but the one that we go live. What is it going to be that we can do in less than a week? And so in half an hour, we redesigned basically the search to be, whatever we absolutely need to have in that release. And it sounded to me like it took less than a week. So if that same treatment had to be done on all these 6, because they were not the only things that needed to be done.
And that's a really great example of applying the principle from the Agile Manifesto, that simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential.
Yeah, we were driven into it with some of the decisions earlier where we didn't do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the release plan. You could do something else as well, but I find that kind of simple visual calendar-based visualization is good. And then we come to the last one I want to talk about is the refinement. So I actually envision refinement as a table. So we have basically 3 columns in it. So the first one is epics, or the stuff that we want to refine, stuff that's too big, but that we know that we're going to start working on a month, 2 months from now. Then there's in refinement, which is, these are we currently refining these item progress. So we have the epics there, or the items, the bigger stories, and then we have tasks that we've identified for these things that we tracking on a daily level. In the daily Scrum, the team can pick items from either refinement or from development activities. And so in refinement meetings, if we have them like every week, we populate this table with task and open items that we want to do during the next week, probably. And so those get thrown here. And then the word you mentioned earlier, ready. So the last column here is items that we consider both from a product owner's point of view and the team's point of view that, yeah, we're ready. We can take this into a sprint in the next sprint planning or whenever we want to. Now, the interesting thing is this one is perfectly next to, if it's perfectly next to the sprint backlog, because we can put the to do ongoing, and then of course that's the done. We can put that on the same wall right next to each other, and we have a basically complete visibility of the work that the team does, whatever we need to refine, and what are we actually now currently doing. Now, the balance is, of course, not 50-50. It might be 90-10, 10 for refinement, or maybe some people like designers might spend like half of their time on refinement, but it provides visibility into that work as well.
Yeah, and
so
one thing that I'll add is like that line, the blue line between ready and to do is kind of like a really important line, because that's the commitment point, right? Like when something crosses from ready into to do, basically that's the team saying, yeah, we're going to do this, and we're committed to it. It's met all the conditions, and this is an important thing because a lot of organizations don't have a very clear understanding of what it means to be committed to work in an agile environment. And that's really the way to understand it.
Well, it often goes either too soft, that it doesn't really mean anything, or it goes too hard, which means whatever happens, we expect you to deliver that. And so if it ruins your lives, and then so be it. And yeah, so, but it's somewhere in the middle. You know, we commit to doing the best we can to deliver this. And we believe right now that it is a realistic commitment that we can do it. But that is not unconditional. It is given.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee. It's just we're committing to work on it, not we're committing to a date, for example. It's
That's by the way, that's one of the things that differentiates Kanban and Scrum in a significant way. That commitment creates a kind of like a pressure cooker. So we commit to X, we try to deliver X, but you know how things are. Surprises come as we try to do it. So since the lid is closed, the pressure builds up. So it's like the same as the heat goes up. And as with pressure cookers, like the reason we use them is it heats up, it cooks better. Same thing happens within a Scrum sprint. If we stick to that and understand the commitment correctly, it's about being smart. Yeah. So the pressure builds up. We have to innovate. We have to be smart as a team to still try to deliver on the commitment. So the temperature rises a little bit, but it cooks better. Yeah. So that is a sort of a structure for creating innovation within a team, within the work that we do. Now, of course, not to go on into bad quality, but to innovation and great quality.
Yeah, and not to go on too much of a tangent, but you know, in Scrum, that pressure cooker environment is part of what contributes towards creating high performance teams, and that particular aspect is lacking in Kanban. Not to say you can't get high performance teams in a Kanban environment, but you know, that's a very deliberate choice on the part of Scrum, and it's one of the things that makes Scrum harder actually than Kanban.
It does, but I've worked with teams, I've studied teams, read a lot, and my experience shows that the pressure, the slight appropriate challenge is a necessary condition for team formation. So if we don't have that pressure, then working not as a team, but as individuals is sufficient. We don't have to innovate. We don't have to find better ways of working with one another. And so teams don't actually form if there is no pressure. So Kanban, we can build those structures, but the framework in and of itself doesn't provide that structure. Yeah. But we can do them. But it requires that we go above the basic flow control. We need to establish targets and goals within the team and then try to deliver on them. Not just, well, it just took longer, so I'm taking longer. The kind of approach.
No, I actually have an overall observation about this, if it's appropriate at this point.
I mean, why not? Aren't we?
So one of the things that I like about this is that it's very easy to understand. People get this idea of layers and kind of almost like cycles and the connection. But if we take the metaphor just a little further, outside that outermost layer, like what's outside of the onion that helps it to grow? It's the dirt. And I think of an organization's culture as the dirt around the planning onion. And it can be fertile dirt, or it can be really, really crappy dirt that does not help with growth. And so when I do this, I always make sure to mention that there's something else out here. And an organization can also be conscious about their culture and try and improve that too. But that's a whole other discussion.